It's really exciting to have everybody here together, and it's always a beautiful opportunity when those of us who are part of the nonprofit community can come together to learn from each other, and that's precisely the opportunity that we have today. So, quick question. Always love to check in with people. These are certainly turbulent and uncertain times, and sometimes it feels like there's no end in sight. So if you wouldn't mind just popping into the comments and let us know how you're doing today. And this is a sincere question, and whatever you drop into the comments, I promise you'll be on my mind today. If you're having a bad day, I'll be thinking of you, and if you're having a great day, I'll be celebrating it right alongside you. So feel free to drop into the comments how you're feeling today. And again, for those of you who are just now joining us for today's presentation, welcome in. It's a pleasure to have you join us. I love it. Too much Zoom today. Jarrett and I were just talking about how we're starting to get Zoom fatigue. So many Zoom meetings, so many Zoom links to keep track of. Great to see that people are doing awesome. So far, so good. Surviving in COVID times with a 12-week-old infant in tow. Wow. Well, I'll be thinking of you, Shannon. Awesome. Great to see people doing well in Dallas. People on their second webinar today. Love that. Awesome. 2 cups of coffee kind of morning. I can resonate with that deeply. I always start off with nice coffee and then about 50 more throughout the day. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for checking in with us, everyone. It's always nice to see how we're doing. Let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Nick Miller. I'm the Director of Partnerships here at Fundraise Up. In case you missed it, we're over here in beautiful Brooklyn, New York. It's a little overcast today, and the weather is actually quite perfect, very temperate. On the screen right now, you should be able to see my email address. If you have any questions after today's presentation, please feel free to email me. And I also invite you to check in with me on LinkedIn. I love staying connected with all of you, seeing what you're doing professionally and what your organizations are doing as well. And if you're not entirely familiar with what we do here at Fundraise Up, I know we have some people joining in and learning about us for the first time. We have created the world's most individualized online donation experience. We've been able to accomplish that by using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. And when we pull that all together, we help you get better donations from happier donors. And if you're intrigued by this, stick around, stay tuned. We'll have an opportunity at the end to set you up with a demo of the platform if you'd like. With that said, I would love to turn it over to our dear friend, Jarrett Way from Mighty Citizen. Take it away.
All right, we're looking good on your end?
Looks beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone from rainy Austin, Texas today. It's quite a rainy day, which I guess I was telling Nick is a nice change from the heat. Thanks for joining me. Our presentation is Hack the Mind, using psychology to boost online engagement. And if it's all right, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in with an activity for everyone. So I'd like for you all to let me know in the chat which way this figure is spinning. Is it clockwise or is she spinning counterclockwise? And I'll give you just a few seconds to let me know. All right, well, it depends really on your perspective, right? So it can look either way depending on who you're asking, right? Let me do another activity with you before we jump into the meat of this. So I have 3 triangles here, and when the words appear in these triangles, I'd like for you to read them aloud as quickly as you can, all right? Easy enough. You read them aloud as quickly as you possibly can. Now I want you to take a second and really read what's in these triangles. So we have Paris in the V string, once in a lifetime, bird in the V hand. So you might not have noticed that your first time around, especially because I asked you to read them quickly. And that's simply because the human mind is complex and it is irrational. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're going to be talking about today in the context of marketing communications for your nonprofit. So by the end of this session today, you should be able to do a few things. You should be able to appreciate the complexity of the human mind and how it responds to the messages that you put out. And then also you'll be able to begin experimenting with these psychological tactics or these hacks in order to communicate better with your target audiences. So we're going to talk about a lot of these different hacks that I think you could implement, some as early as tomorrow, to start really better communicating with the people that your organization serves. So I'd like to start out by saying that this is Sigmund Freud. He is obviously a famous psychologist. A lot of people know him in the psychology realm, and I would also like to say that this is not me. I am not Sigmund Freud. I am not a famous psychologist. I do not study this or do any sort of professional psychology for a living, but I am Jarrett, as Nick said. I am the marketing manager here at Mighty Citizen. Mighty Citizen is a full-service marketing and branding agency for mission-driven organizations. So we work day in and day out with organizations just like yours. We love nonprofits. We have 2 decades of experience working with mission-driven organizations, and it's always a great time to be able to share some of what we know and what we've learned in that time with you all. So thank you all for being here. I have a career in strategic communications, content marketing, and storytelling for mission-driven organizations. My email is right there at the bottom. That's jway@mightycitizen.com. I believe we will have some time for questions here at the end of the webinar, but for any reason we don't get to your question, or you just think of something after the fact, please feel free to email me. And just like Nick, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's Jarrett Way. So jumping in, I want to tell you about this global study that was done back in 2000 about the human attention span. So the study indicated that humans actually only have a 12-second attention span. And compared to the goldfish, at 9 seconds, we have them beat by just a few seconds. So good for us. Well, 13 years later, the same study was conducted, and it was found out that the human attention span had declined down to only 8 seconds. So why do you care about this? Well, the reality is that you have just a few precious moments to grab the attention of someone who really wasn't looking to give it to you. So you only have 8 seconds now, maybe even less at this point, to capture their interest and convert that into real engagement for your organization. So there are plenty of reasons that you could probably think of for, that would explain, why the human attention span is diminishing. A lot of that is the advent of the internet, the wide usage of the internet. We're all glued to different technology. That does have an effect long term, but the fact of the matter is you have 8 seconds, and that's not easy to do in 8 seconds, but it's even scarier when you consider the amount of content that exists online. And I'll give you a little example of that. So in just 1 internet minute, you can see around this wheel of all the things that happen on the internet in just 60 seconds. And as a mission-driven organization, you're probably often thinking about your competitors. So you're thinking about probably other nonprofits that occupy the same space that you do. And online, you're not only competing with those people and all of the internet, but you're also competing against that 8-second attention span. So in just 1 minute in 2020, you can see just around the wheel, some of these 2.5 million Snapchats time, almost 5 million videos viewed on YouTube, 4.1 million search queries. That is insane. And I am a card-carrying millennial, and I will even say this is shocking to me. So let's take this even further. How much content is created every single day on the internet? Well, that is 2.5 quintillion bytes of content created every single day, and you don't have to count them. That is, ladies and gentlemen, 17 zeros on the end of that. It's 2.5 quintillion bytes of content every single day. And that's a lot of information, right? And you consider the human brain. The human brain processes 400 billion bits of information per second, but we're only able to understand around 2,000 of those. So as marketers and communicators, how do you get to that subconscious understanding for your target audiences, right? How can you access the depth of the brain that will drive your donations or your membership or whatever your goal might be? And to that, I say it starts with what we call psychographics. So psychographics, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think I want to ask initially if your organization even uses psychographics. So does your organization have a psychographic profile or profiles of your users? And if you could let me know in the chat, I would be very curious. So oftentimes when we ask this, especially in person, a lot of people they either don't use psychographics or they just have no idea what psychographics are. So I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to go over it a little bit. And I'll use an example. So this is Deepa. Deepa is a member of your nonprofit's target audience. She represents a more generalized human persona, and many organizations will just do a demographic analysis, right? So things that can be checked off on a box, things like their gender, location, education, income, the religion, things like that. And with the demographic analysis, they might come up with something like this. So Deepa is a female. She lives within 50 miles. She's a high school graduate, a mother of 3. She owns her own business. She's an immigrant. She makes a high income, and she's religious. Now, with your demographics, there's nothing wrong with generating this kind of information about your users, but it isn't, and it shouldn't be the end-all be-all that informs your messaging to your audiences. So what you really want to do is take it a step further and use psychographics. So an example of a psychographic profile is this. So you find out that Deepa is extroverted, she's aggressive, she's conscientious, she's traditional, and she's family focused. So more accurately, psychographics can fill in the gap for you here. You're trying to understand the personality profile of your audiences. So one of the most widely used personality assessments is right here in front of you. It's called Ocean, right? So it's the idea that psychologists try to plot each person on a scale for each one of these different 5 elements. So you have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So everyone falls somewhere for each one of these. So on a scale from 0 to 100, someone is either less open, more introverted, more extroverted, more neurotic or less neurotic, things like that, so on and so forth. So this is what constitutes the beginnings of a psychographic profile for your users. Again, everybody falls somewhere on the scale for each and every one of these. And that's how you can start to get an idea of psychographics for your target audiences. So to be clear, your demographics can absolutely help you shape your overall communication strategy, right? So that's, in terms of your channels, your resources, even your timelines. But when you have psychographics, those actually help shape your messages. So that's what to say and how you say it. So demographics will tell you the how, which is where and when to intercept, but psychographics will tell you the what, which speaks to the personality, and it helps shape how people respond to your messaging. So really what you're doing with psychographics is you're creating a more comprehensive profile of your target audiences. So now you're probably asking, well, Jarrett, where do I even begin to gather psychographics here? Well, psychographics and building psychographics is a high touch process. So I would say a few things. The very first thing you want to do is perhaps in-person interviews. So sit down with current or prospective users and ask a ton of questions. The pro tip here is to use silence to dig deep. So in human psychology, on a one-on-one conversation, in public speaking, anything, silence is very uncomfortable. That's just a fact. Silence is very uncomfortable. When there is silence in the room, someone feels the need to say something just to break the silence. And when people fill the silence, especially in that one-on-one in-person interview setting, that's when you get the real insights into how they think about you, how they think about themselves, why they do what they do, things like that. So I always say here that in a matter of silence, the first to speak loses, and you do not want to be the loser in this game, because you want to know the nitty gritty, and you'll get it when they end up breaking the silence. Secondly is we have focus groups. So focus groups are really great for comparing options. So say you might have a new fundraising campaign or an ad campaign. A focus group can help you understand how a group of people compare these different ideas. And the pro tip here is to start with a questionnaire. And that really just helps you so that you don't have a few voices that are dominating the conversation. You can kind of get the general disposition or the affect of the people that are in the room that you're going to be having this focus group with, so you can kind of navigate and be ready, knowing how they think about certain things already. So starting with the questionnaire is a really great approach to your focus groups. Third, we have surveys. Now, surveys are probably the most scalable option, right? And by the way, at mightycitizen.com/insights, we have some really great resources for designing, executing, and improving your surveys. And these are something that you really want to invest in your surveys. And that's just because they are a low investment in time, but you also get a lot of data from that. You don't have to expel a lot of time or energy in order to do these. But with surveys, you have to be very, very careful. The pro tip here is that question writing is key. Questions are critical when it comes to surveys. And what we say at Mighty Citizen all the time is that bad questions don't stink. That's bad questions don't stink. And that's because question writing, there is a lot of science that goes behind it, and it is a lot of psychology. And oftentimes, whenever we're writing our own questions and we're not necessarily trained in how to do it properly, there's bias built into the questions that we ask. And one bad question can skew your data entirely. So all of these tactics are really affected by bias, but really this surveys and these questions that you're asking, again, one-off question can really just make it all for nothing. So make sure that your questions are sound, they're solid, and sometimes you may need some third-party help in order to formulate some of these. Now I want to move into what really will inform a lot of the rest of this, and that's the two ways that we think. And before I jump right in, I'm going to have you do a little bit of math, so don't hate me, all right? So the first equation I want you to do is simple enough. It's 2 by 2, right? So I'll give you just a few seconds to give me an answer. And then the next equation I want you to do is 23 times 17. And I'll give you a few more. So there are two ways that our minds process information. So a psychologist called Daniel Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky shaped this idea of a system 1 and a system 2 way of thinking and their behavior economic and psychological testing throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So in system 1, we have what is more unconscious thought, right? I asked you what 2 times 2 was. That's something you really don't even have to think about. It's 4. But when I ask you what 23 by 17 is, you're moving into this more deliberate thought, which is a system 2 way of thinking. And by the way, the answer to that is 391 for any of you who might have gotten that right. So in system 1, that's where we do the vast majority of our thinking. So it's fast, it's intuitive, it's emotional, and it's unconscious. So that 2 times 2 was something that came very simply to all of you. That system 2 level of thinking is slower, it's more deliberate. So when people say, let me think about it, they're using their system 2 way of thinking. It's more logical, it's more conscious than that system 1 level of thinking. So as communicators, you want your audiences to be in system 1. So all the time you want them to offload whatever they're thinking about into this system 1 way of thinking. And that's where most of the thinking happens, as well as the emotional self. And you want to reach that emotional self to help persuade them to engage with your organization. So here's a really good example of system 1 versus system 2. So back in the before times when we all drove to work and we didn't all work remotely, if you were getting in your car and going to work, you drive there, you didn't really have to think much about it, right? You would get in your car, turn it on, you don't think about, looking in the mirrors or your blinker or putting the foot on the gas or putting your foot on the brakes. You get to work, and oftentimes you get there, you don't even think about how it is you got there. That's your system one way of thinking. Again, it's that intuitive one, right? It's unconscious. So say you get to work and your normal parking spot or your parking lot is closed off and you have to park somewhere else. And maybe this is a dreaded parallel park and you have to really think about it. That's your system two way of thinking. So you have to look behind you, you have to see what's in front of you, you have to angle yourself correctly, you have to back in, you have to see what cars are already there and make sure you don't hit on anyone on either behind you or in front of you. That is the system two. It's more slow, it's deliberate. Again, it's the more conscious level of thinking. So what the heck does this have to do with marketing and communications? Well, like I mentioned, Daniel Kahneman coined the system one and system two terminology. And what he's talking about is from this quote. So from his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a fantastic read, I highly recommend it. If there are several ways of achieving the same goal, people will eventually gravitate to the least demanding course of action. Laziness is built deep into our nature. And it's a little bit of a cheeky quote, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about the system one versus system two. He's talking about this cognitive laziness. Our brains do not want to have to think about every single thing that it takes to drive to work. Like I mentioned, putting your foot on the gas, your blinkers. That's all offloaded onto your system one way of thinking. It's a shortcut, right? So as often as you can, you want to tap into system one, which connects the emotional self and feeling self, as opposed to that system two, which is more rational and it's more doubting. Your job as a communicator is to implement what we call cognitive ease. And that's just a measure of how easy it is for our brains to process information. So without cognitive ease, your users aren't likely to feel anything. And that's not what we want them to be. So an example for you of what isn't cognitive ease and more cognitive strain. This is the admittedly former homepage of the Montana Association of Counties. And again, this is an example of cognitive strain. You can notice right off the bat, this visual clutter. It's creating this cognitive strain on your mind. There are at least 3 different navigation menus. The font styling is needlessly sophisticated while still being kind of bland and lifeless. This website hurts its users' brains and its users aren't engaging with it in the way that it should. For an example, psychological studies have found that shares in companies with easier to pronounce names perform better than those with difficult to pronounce names. So in online marketing, any possible element that can be simplified on your website especially should be used, whether that's infographics, intuitive web design, easy to read font, so on and so forth. So what are some of the things that produce cognitive strain? Well, first and foremost is poor writing. If the user has to read a sentence twice, you're in trouble. Your writing should be top-notch and as short as necessary to do the job. You don't want anything extraneous there. Just make it simple and make it clear. Secondly is having too many choices. So every piece of content should have a single call to action. So if you put up a page on your website where you send out a marketing email or a donor letter or a campaign or anything like that, make it simple and make it linear to a single call to action. You can have multiple calls to action, but you don't want every single option going to a million different things. You're not going to see conversions there, right? You want to make it linear. That makes it as easy as possible for your user. Third is having too many steps. So if you're asking the user to do something, it should be short. So if you, let's say you have a donation page, right? I should be able to go to your organization's website and your donation page and donate an amount within 2, maybe 3 mouse clicks. Anything more than that is doing way too much, and it's a turn off for your users. And then lastly, it's unfamiliar design. Do not try to reinvent the wheel. I cannot stress this enough. Your users know how to interact with the internet. They've been using it just as long as you have. They know the expectations and the patterns and everything that already exists and how we use the internet. There's a certain culture, if you will, around it, and these certain methods. So if you're pushing the envelope in any way, which isn't a bad thing, don't do it all at once. Do it iteratively. So a little bit at a time. how you communicate to your users is as important, if not more important, than what you're communicating. So you could have the best content in the world, but if you're presenting it in the system 2 way of thinking, it's not going to be effective, and you're doing yourself a huge disservice, and you're wasting so much time because you put a lot of time into your content, and your website is your biggest piece of content. So here's an example of what I think is cognitive ease. This is the website for the American Association of Nurse Practitioners. Full disclosure, this is a client of Mighty Citizens. We did their website. They're an awesome client. And this I really think just feels like a website. There's a clear call to action. It's simple, it's structured, it's compelling. This is what the brain is expecting whenever you go to a website, right? It doesn't have too much going on, like the one I showed you as an example of cognitive strain. This is a really good example, I think, of cognitive ease in a website. So what are the things that produce cognitive ease? Well, first and foremost is keeping donor communications as simple as possible. So it's kind of already hits on a point that we just said, but say the same thing over and over and over. You as someone who works within your organization 40 plus hours a week are used to hearing the same messaging day in and day out, and you think it's really easy for you to think that saying it too much will kind of fatigue your users. And I am here to tell you that your users are not thinking about you nearly as much as you're thinking about you. So you could probably be saying what you want to say a little bit more in your donor communications, but keep it as simple as possible. Say the same thing over and over. You're reinforcing the message. Secondly is to offload tasks from prospective donors whenever possible. So if you don't need them, absolutely need the donor to do something, do not ask them to do it. Again, if you're creating more work for your users, for potential donors, it is a huge turnoff, and you're going to miss out on potential donations because you're having them do more than they actually need to do. 3 is giving information more than you ask for it. So provide value more often than you're requesting it. Personally, I think that this is the entire premise of marketing and content marketing, is providing value, right? So if you have something to give, something that is going to enrich the professional lives or the organizations that you're working with, or the target audiences that you have, give that information freely, and it will come back to you tenfold within engagement. I promise you. When you have something to give and you're giving that, whether that's thought leadership, resources, whatever it is, you're providing value, and that's something that is absolutely valuable to your target audiences. Then lastly is creating more structure online and in fundraising emails. So people consume content differently online than they do offline. So make sure that your sitemap and your pages have a clear, repeatable structure, right? So like I said, people know how to use the internet. We all use it the same way. Online, we need to be reinforcing these patterns, right? And this is all in an attempt to keep people feeling and not thinking too hard, keeping them in that system 1 way of thinking. So this next section, we're going to talk about heuristics, and this is really the bulk of it. These are the hacks that I'm talking about. And a heuristic is any approach to problem solving, learning, or discovery that employs a practical method not guaranteed to be optimal, but sufficient for the immediate goals. Now you're all probably thinking, what the heck, Jared? You just told me that everything I present in my content needs to be clear and concise and understandable, and you just gave me this definition for this word that I still don't even know what it means. Well, I'll tell you what it means simply. A heuristic is nothing more than a rule of thumb. So all the ways that the human brain takes shortcuts to escape system 2 and live in system 1 are these rules of thumb, right? Imagine deliberately thinking about every single thing that you encounter, right? That would be exhausting. So we have this system 1 way of thinking for a reason. And again, you want to be taking your users out of system 2 and into system 1. Now, as far as heuristics, there's probably over 100 that have been identified. And for the sake of this presentation, I'll be sharing just a few of those, which I think are relevant to marketing and communications. And keep in mind that Heuristics are powerful, and you can employ them to bolster your fundraising efforts. These are things, again, that you can implement today if you really wanted to, sooner than later, and you'll see some really great immediate results. We do have a heuristic cheat sheet, so it's something that I will link here at the end of the presentation. You can see everything that I'm talking about for these heuristics, so you can see how you can implement them in your own organization. So we'll jump into the first one, which is affect. So people make decisions quickly by bringing their emotional response into play. So the role that emotion plays in how we respond and persuade others to respond is affect, right? Again, we want people feeling and not thinking. And affect, in terms of psychology, it is a psychological term. It really just means the general disposition of someone, how someone feels about X, Y, and Z, and how they're kind of just like predisposed to think about it. And that's used a lot in psychological studies. So I'll give you an example of affect. So this is an ad from the Truth Initiative. You've probably heard of them. It's an anti-teen smoking campaign. It's been around for over 2 decades, and they use very emotional advertisements. So there's this old commercial that they have where they pull up in a van to Philip Morris headquarters. And Philip Morris, if you don't know, big tobacco, and loads these body bags onto their steps. And they're essentially telling them in this commercial how many people their products kill every single day. That's clearly a very emotional, provocative message, right? So in contrast, we have the Think, Don't Smoke campaign. So around the same time that the Truth Initiative started that campaign, this Think, Don't Smoke campaign launched. It's much more traditional. It's not provocative. It's not bold. It really just appeals to logic, right? It said it will cost you X amount of money and these diseases if you take up smoking. And this ad was actually run by Philip Morris. They were forced to run these ads after losing some high-profile lawsuits in the 90s. So why would Philip Morris, big tobacco, run a campaign that says, think, don't smoke? When we look at the conversions for both of these, teens exposed to only the ad on the left, the Truth Initiative's ad, the very emotional one, were 66% less likely to smoke in their lifetimes. Now, teens exposed to only the ad on the right from Philip Morris to Think, Don't Smoke were 36% more likely to smoke in their lifetimes. And that is because the System 1 versus System 2 ways of thinking. There is a lot of psychology behind this, and this is the affect heuristic. When people are offloaded into this System 1, they're more emotional, right? And that does make an impact, which I'm about to get into. But Philip Morris, they knew, I mean, there's a lot of psychology that goes behind marketing and advertising. And they saw a 36% increase in teens only exposed to that for a campaign that they were forced to run in the 90s. So how do you use the affect heuristic? Well, you want to use emotion, right? We are appealing to emotional creatures. We tell stories and we recognize humanity. So there are there are 4 main human emotions. We have mad, we have sad, we have glad, and then for the sake of rhyming, we have afraid or afraid, if you will. And every other emotion is a combination of any of these, right? So fear and anger here are probably the best ways to persuade people. And I'm not saying to stir up fear and anger, because there certainly is plenty of that nowadays. But what I'm trying to say is that people have actual fears, right? And if your organization can calm those fears, then you should acknowledge that. And that's what you should be focusing on doing as an organization, using emotion, appealing to the emotional side of everyone, because we are inherently emotional creatures. And that's the affect heuristic. The next heuristic we have is called anchoring. So this is the human tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, which is the anchor, when making decisions. So there's a social experiment that Kahneman actually did that we've done in person. I'm going to not do it in full online, but I'm going to tell you about it virtually. So say we had a room full of people, right? We split it down the middle. We'd give them a questionnaire with 2 questions each. So the first group would get this questionnaire. Question 1, is the tallest redwood tree in California more or less than 150 feet? And then we'd ask them question 2, what's your best estimate of how tall the tallest redwood tree in California is? So in the second half of the room, We get the same questionnaire, the same two questions, but with a little bit of a difference in the first question. Is the tallest redwood tree in California more or less than 810 feet as opposed to the 150? And question two, again, what's your best estimate of how tall the tallest redwood tree in California is? So in collecting these responses, people who received version A of this questionnaire thought that the tallest redwood tree in California was 225 feet. Or in version B, they thought it was 1,125 feet. The actual answer is 380 feet, by the way. That's a huge difference for just these two questionnaires, and that is because of the anchoring effect. We went going back between 150 for the first questionnaire and 810 for the second. That's what people base their answers to question 2 off of. So how is anchoring used in marketing communications? Well, here's a great example, a classic tactic. So this is, I mean, again, a classic tactic used by software firms that exploits this anchoring bias. So this is actually an example from Zoom. So you can see on the left side, they have this monthly billing at $14.99 a month, again, billed monthly. And on the right side, they have this annual billing at $12.49 per month, which is $149.90 billed annually. And then on that right side, they have this little green sticker, here's the value, save $30, right? So obviously it's far better for Zoom to get an annual payment of $149.90 from users up front than a single $14.99 payment each month. But when it displays the annual price at $12.49 after the monthly price, it seems like people are saving money by signing up for a year, even though they're paying $134.51 more and tying themselves into a year-long contract. So it feels kind of schemy, but this is something that you can use for your donations, right? You may even sometimes create like a dummy offer specifically to anchor the user at a high number so that the lower number seems even lower by comparison. It's highest to lowest versus lowest to highest for your donation amount. So you want to start with the highest amount listed first, and then the anchoring effect will kind of take over. So everything else as it descends feels a little bit less drastic. That's how you can use the anchoring heuristic. So this next heuristic is, I would say, the anchoring effect's cousin, but it's an entirely different heuristic. And before I tell you what it is, I'm going to tell you about this study. So this was an actual study that was done in a movie theater. There were 2 sizes of popcorn, a small size for $6 and a large size for $12. Now, most people in the study, when presented with just these 2 options, would go for the small size at $6. But when a medium size was introduced at $10.50, they always got the large because they perceived the value being only $1.50 more than the medium size. And that is what we call the decoy effect. So people tend to change their preference between 2 options when presented the third option that is asymmetrical. So think about this maybe in the context of your donation forms, right? The first 2 options can be close, but make less of a difference on the top end, so it seems more reasonable for your users. So if I were an organization trying to raise money, I would make my online donation form a $10 option, and then maybe with a $40 and a $50 option, because the difference at the top end is much smaller. And then you can just keep an eye on the data that comes in after you do that and make small tweaks and adjustments as you need to. That's how you can employ the decoy effect. So this next one, I'm gonna lead this off with a question. So I'll give you a technological invention. It's a breakthrough that will increase the country's wealth, make us more efficient and productive, and make our lives much more fun. The only thing I want in return is that you let me swoop in every year, take 40,000 people at random, and kill them. So my question to you is, do you take the deal? I'll give you a few seconds to let me know if you would take it or not. So typically when we do this, around 87% of people say no, that they won't take the deal. But most likely, you've already taken the deal because you own a car. Cars do kill 40,000 people annually, but it is all those things that I said it was in that initial question. But if I had presented this car first and then asked the question, there'd be far more of you willing to take the deal. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a heuristic that we call framing. Our choices are influenced by the way they are framed through different wordings, settings, and situations. This is perhaps the most powerful heuristic on the list. Framing happens all the time, and we're unaware of it 99% of the time, and we do it unintentionally. It's using remember to versus forget. You know, there's negative and there's positive framing. So a really classic, simple example of framing is this image, right? If I tell you it's a black background, you might see two white faces looking at each other. If I tell you it's a white background, you might see this black candle holder here in the image. This is a classic example of framing. So notice the difference here. Taxes are a social burden versus taxes are an investment in society. Drug addiction is a law and order problem versus drug addiction is a public health problem. We are facing a crisis versus we are facing a challenge. Buying beef that is 80% lean versus buying beef that is 20% fat. Framing is so pervasive that it's often done unconsciously, but it is so powerful. How things are framed affect how we feel about them. So here's a good example. Let's say that you're having an event with an early bird special, right? So this is an actual study done that was in Europe, and there was this event and they had two different sets of language around their registration. So version A said, if you register after June 15th, you'll pay $50 more for the event. Version B says, if you register before June 15th, you'll pay $50 less for the event. So when it was all said and done, in version A, when it was framed as a negative, you'd be paying $50 more, 92% of people registered early. But in version B, when it was framed as a positive, only 67% registered early. This is also a great example of loss aversion, right? Humans feel bad about a loss more than they feel good about an equivalent gain. So losing $50 feels worse than saving $50 feels good. So try out this language for your registrations, and this is something that you can implement again tomorrow, and you can start to see the results there. The next heuristic, let's talk about the peak end rule. So people judge an experience based on an average of how they feel at the peak and at the end. So researchers conducted an experiment where patients came in for a very exciting procedure, which is their annual colonoscopy. And some of the colonoscopies lasted briefly. So in patient A, you can see that it lasted briefly, but it rated high on the pain intensity scale. So it was short and painful. Meanwhile, patient B underwent a much longer colonoscopy, but the spikes in pain intensity were relatively low, and the procedure ended on a less painful note. So these patients remembered it as a relatively harmless experience. So out of these two, I'm going to ask, which patient remembered the procedure as more painful overall? And just in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and say that patient B is more likely to return for his procedure next year because his memory of it is softened compared to patient A. And this is the experiencing self versus the remembering self, right? So using your website as an example, if your users have a bad time on your website, the remembering self is more powerful and influential, and that will absolutely affect their engagement with you long term. So how do you use the peak end rule? Well, you want to design an amazing experience at the end, right? So go above and beyond. A perfect example of this is the company Chewy, right? So you need to be designing these amazing experiences, and I mean designing these experiences. So as an example, Chewy is a pet supplies company. You can order, your dog food from them, as a subscription. They'll get it sent straight to your door. So this woman had this very cute dog, and unfortunately, she had, paid for a couple of sets of dog food out already, and her dog unfortunately passed away. And she reached out to Chewy just to say, hey, my dog passed away. I've already paid for, these 2-3 sets of dog food to come over the next few months. Is there any way I could cancel that and get a refund? Not only did Chewy cancel that, but they actually ended up sending her flowers and a card just to offer their condolences for her dog passing away. And it's those kinds of experiences that are designed at the end where they go above and beyond that really make a difference. And I'll tell you what, I adopted she's now 8 months old, but I have a very cute puppy running around here somewhere who I adopted back in April. And this made a customer out of me. I go to Chewy for my dog food and for some of my supplies because I know that this is the type of the care that they put into designing these types of experiences. Doing things like this goes a long, long way in your marketing communications, and it makes all the difference in terms of your image and your brand presence. And those are the things that you need to focus on. By the way, we have this great on-demand webinar on Mighty Citizens Tools. So I'll show you a link to that at the end, called Digital Envy. It has some great examples of how nonprofits have gotten really creative with thanking their donors. All right, y'all, I need to take a quick break to wash my hands. I will be back, but while I do that, I would love it if in the chat box you could complete the following word, and I will be back. All right, I'm back. I sang the ABCs twice. My hands are nice and clean, as I should. And it looks like a lot of you said soap. And that is because I told you I was going to wash my hands first. If I had said that I needed to go take a quick bite of my delicious lunch, you might have said soup, right? So I'm gonna give you these two words, banana and vomit. Now, your system one way of thinking is constantly making associations between words and images, feelings and actions, ideas and memories. So when you see these two words, your system one responds automatically. So your heart rate jumped, your skin prickled, your sweat glands were activated. Your mind automatically assumed this temporal sequence and casual connection between banana and vomit. You're experiencing a temporary aversion to bananas, and now you are unusually ready to recognize and respond to objects and concepts associated with each word. So something yellow, for example, may make you feel queasy. Or later, you go to your kitchen after the webinar, you see a banana, and you say, dang, Jared, I feel nauseous right now. System one also recognized the surprise in seeing these two words together because they usually aren't. And all these examples are the heuristics that we call priming. When people are exposed to one stimulus, it affects how they respond to another stimulus. Words create associations, so you need to choose them very wisely. Words mean everything in marketing communications. Words matter so much. So it's the difference between you versus we, right? Those have two different feels depending on the context. Join the giving club versus join the giving society. A donation form versus donate today. Images also matter in this context. So looking at this website for the Challenger School, you think it's a school for very young kids or even strictly kids from an Asian descent. However, the Challenger School goes up to the 8th grade and it accepts kids from anywhere. So the question is, does the Challenger School know that their website gives this impression? Perhaps their specific strategy is to try to recruit more young children, especially those of Asian descent. And in that case, the website is doing exactly that. It's doing a good job of delivering that message. Images matter just as much as words. They can really tell a story. So think about that in the context of your marketing and communications. So this is Sarah. Sarah loves to listen to new age music and she reads her horoscope every single day. In her spare time, she enjoys yoga, aromatherapy, and attending a local spirituality group. So my question for you here is, which is Sarah most likely? Is she a school teacher? Is she a life coach? Or is she a holistic healer? I'll give you a few minutes to fill that in the chat. Again, is she a school teacher, a life coach, or a holistic healer? So typically only a third of the people say teacher, but statistically, there are more school teachers than holistic healers and life coaches. So it felt like she belonged to one of those groups, even though statistically she is more likely to be a school teacher. That's because you're primed with details and jump to a conclusion. Again, there are statistically more school teachers than there are the other two, but based on the details that they gave you about Sarah here, a lot of you might have said that she's a life coach or a holistic healer. And that is a heuristic that we call representativeness. People judge the probability of an event by finding a comparable known event and assuming that the probabilities will be similar. That's an easy way just to say that we judge books by their covers. As humans, that's what we do. So here's an example of representativeness and how to use it. So you want to show your users what they expect to see, right? I said that a little bit earlier. We all use the internet the same way. People have expectations when they're interacting online. Show your users what they expect to see from your organization. You want to use their vocabulary and not yours. We always say, you know, internally in our organizations, again, I make this point, we are around our organizations for 40 plus hours every single week, thinking about it, eating it, living it, sleeping it, breathing it, all of it. You have a lot of internal jargon that you use, whether it's your acronyms, your sayings, the things that anyone else in your office might understand just right off the bat. No one else outside of your office probably knows what those things are. Do not use that jargon externally because that is going to be a turnoff for your audiences. So use their vocabulary and not yours, the way that they understand generally. And lastly, when introducing something new, whether that's a product, a service, a resource, anything like that, compare it to something that's already known. And sometimes you need some unbiased third-party research to help determine your user behavior. And that's absolutely something that you should look into if you have the resources to do so. So summing it all up here, first, you want to invest in your resources to segment your prospective donors by their psychographics, not just their demographics, and then use those to craft these insights for your messages. Humans think using two systems. So we talked about that system one and system two way of thinking, that Daniel Kahneman Kahn. And again, you want people in that system one, that emotional feeling. They don't want to have to be deliberate in that system two. And experiment with these heuristics in your communications and discover what moves the needles. Like I said, a lot of these things that I went over, you can implement pretty quickly, and just look at the analytics, just track the data that you're seeing as you make these small tweaks, and you can really see what's working and what's not, and try something new, you know, week to week, month to month, to see what's getting you the most bang for your buck, so to speak. At this time, I'd love to take some questions and maybe turn it back over to Nick. You can get the slides here and the heuristic cheat sheet I was talking about at mightycitizen.com/hackthemind. And again, we have plenty of tools and templates, a lot of which I referenced in this presentation, even a lot more than that are all free to download for your organization at mightycitizen.com/tools. Thank you guys so much. Again, I'm Jarrett Way. You can email me at away@mightycitizen.com. And Nick, I will turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jarrett. And yes, if you have any questions about what we have learned today, feel free to drop those into the Q&A of Zoom. So if you wiggle your mouse around the screen, you'll see a little toolbar pop up at the bottom, and there's a Q&A icon with two speech bubbles. So you can pop that open and ask any questions that you might have. This is, of course, a fascinating subject matter. And what Jarrett has talked about today, there are things that we might not typically think about in our day-to-day operations. And I have to tell you, I'm guilty of using jargon. You know, there was a time when I was working in a wonderful nonprofit, and we do have our own internal language, and it creates friction between you and your donors. And so learning the concepts that we have today and beginning to apply them into our fundraising strategies is absolutely important. And if you're like me, you like to take notes, and so maybe you've already filled up a notebook page today with thoughts that you've put together from the presentation. But if you are the type of learner that likes to revisit what's been shared, we'll absolutely be sharing this presentation with you. And like Jarrett said, Mighty Citizen has some awesome resources that you will be able to download, and we'll make those available to you as well. Let's see. It looks like we had a question come in here, Jarrett. It says, are Esri tapestry segments based on psychographics?
Could you ask that one more time, Nick? Sorry.
Are Esri tapestry segments based on psychographics?
I am honestly not familiar with Esri tapestry segment, so I'm happy to follow up if they want to reach out and shoot an email.
Absolutely. Awesome chance for us to follow up with you. Thanks for asking that question. Esri, if you're unfamiliar with it, for those of you in the audience, is a really awesome service. They're actually based out of Southern California, I believe, and the work is not all that different from what the folks are doing over at Mighty Citizen, so absolutely worth taking a look at. Any other questions, feel free to pop them on into the Q&A. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. And there's just a couple things I want to touch on before we part ways today. We have about 6 minutes left together, and like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we want to be absolutely respectful of your time today. So let me go ahead and switch back over to my screen. I want to take a moment to share a little bit more with you about the Fundraise Up product. And so a lot of the principles that Jarrett's talked about today, we've built in to the Fundraise Up online donation experience. And it's absolutely true that there's these small changes that we as organizations can make today to start to see greater impact from our donors tomorrow. And there's a feature of the Fundraise Up platform that popped up into my mind as Jarrett was sharing with us some of the opportunities we have using the concepts that he shared. And so I want to show you, and for those of you who are already Fundraise Up customers, this is a customer feature favorite. And this is an opportunity that's presented to donors that enables them to convert a one-time gift to a monthly donation, because we know that, say, over the course of 12 months, a recurring donation is going to have greater value than that one time. And so it's interesting because, you know, you can look at software, and we had a great example about Zoom's pricing where they invite you in to pay a lot upfront for their service. But in this sense, as part of your fundraising strategy, you can invite your donors in to give monthly as opposed to giving a lot of money all at once. And so this is a feature that's built into our platform. It's based on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And it's a really neat feature. And a lot of our customers actually see a significant number of recurring donors start their journey just because they were presented with a screen like this. And you might notice that there are some visual indicators that are built in to this screen, such as the little gift icon that we've attached to that $40 a month option, and our use of colors here as well with these buttons. And so we've learned from educators like Jarrett about what works best for your donors, and we've implemented it in our platform. So I'm going to open a quick poll for everybody who is with us today. And I want to see who is interested in learning a little bit more about Fundraise Up. What we do for you is we will hop on a Zoom call with you. We'll take a look at what your current giving forms look like, and we'll also offer to give you a full demo of the Fundraise Up platform. And this is the perfect time to look at a product like Fundraise Up because we are, it seems like moments away from our year-end push for donations. We're moments away from Giving Tuesday. And you might already be looking at new ways to raise more money, especially in light of COVID-19. So we'd absolutely love to give you a demo of the platform and chat a little bit more about what you're doing with your online giving. Looks like we have some responses coming in. That's awesome. Jarrett, we really appreciate these opportunities where we can gather together as a fundraising community and learn from each other. Your expertise today, I think, is going to massively help a lot of nonprofits as they prepare for their year-end push. Mighty Citizen itself is a great company. So if you're in the audience right now and thinking about ways that you want to improve your fundraising strategy, but maybe need some help, Mighty Citizen is a great asset, and I highly recommend chatting with them about what some of those opportunities might look like. Thank you to everyone who has responded to the poll. Really appreciate that. We'll be getting in touch with you. As we wrap up today, one of the things that we'll do is we've attached a quick survey, and so as soon as we close out of Zoom, you'll be able to see that survey. We'll also attach it in an email. And we just have a couple questions, actually 4 questions, that we want to ask you about what's important to you as you're fundraising here at the end of 2020. And the reason we want to know this is because we're continuously improving what we provide to our customers. And whether you're an existing Fundraise Up customer or not, we want you to know that we want to do what we can to help you succeed in your work as a nonprofit. So if you have a chance, a couple free moments to fill out that survey, it's just 4 questions and takes just a moment to complete. And with that said, we want to say a big thank you to everybody who's joined us here today for Fundraise Up Learning Lab. We've had the pleasure of hosting Jarrett Wade from Mighty Citizen. Jarrett, thank you so much for your time today. And everybody else as well, thank you for your time. We are sending only positive vibes your way as you continue your fundraising work. And we hope to see you next time for Fundraise Up Learning Lab. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.